Fairfield, Keene. Oh, we've got a good range so far. Some folks from Derry, from Central area, all the way out to Keene. I don't even know where Brookfield is, to be perfectly honest. Grantham, right on. This is so exciting. We're just going to be waiting a little bit while longer, my friends, because, oh, Marlborough, Massachusetts. Hello, hello. Chester, hi, Mom. We're going to be waiting just a little bit while longer, and then we'll jump in with introductions. California, holy moly. We've got people from all across the country. Hi, Kimmy. This is going to be great. But just feel free to share where you're coming in from in the chat. We'll save the question box specifically for questions, but while you're in the chat box, feel free to say where you're coming from. Feel free to mention what your interest in peregrine falcons or raptors or birds in general is, and I'll share it out since you guys are all muted because we are anticipating about 95 people tonight. So we've got folks coming in from Pepperell, Massachusetts and South Sutton, New Hampshire. This is so great. Summer, New Hampshire. I feel like every once in a while, it's just like when you get the school cancellations, you see these names of New Hampshire and you're like, I've never heard of that town before. Plymouth, I'm aware of. Awesome, this is cool. So lots of New Hampshireites, which we were anticipating tonight, but it sounds like we've got a bunch of people coming in from all over the place. And why is it that you guys are interested in tonight's presentation? What do you find so alluring about our aerial predator friends? Oh, hang on one second, we're having some technical difficulties already. Oh, super. Love all birds. We're having some minor technical difficulties with Chris. So let me just give him a call back real quick. I'm going to put myself on mute so you don't have to hear that nonsense. All right, guys, per usual, little technical difficulty, but we're still planning on starting at 7 o'clock. And I'm jumping back into the chat to see what you guys are interested in. Fascinated by them and knowing that they're so intelligent. Someone on here got to work with one of Chris's banded peregrines at Vin's. Oh my gosh, after they were injured. For those of you that might have been following, we have a banded peregrine that I believe has been released by now. Ian will be able to mention that on the chat. It was mentioned in our newsletter just last week, I believe, that it went out. Someone that was banded and then found and rehabbed and I believe returned to the wilds. Oh, and Sue Harmon from the Manchester City Library has joined us. Excellent. Thank you for offering to help. We're hoping that Chris can find his panelist invitation and we'll be on our way momentarily. Okay. Okay, let's see. I believe because this is in a webinar, the raising of the hand won't allow us to unmute you guys. Just because we're expecting 95 people today, we chose to keep the audio on your end off. I know it's kind of a bummer. You guys totally are invited to join us afterwards for conversation. But for this particular moment in time, as it's in full-blown webinar mode, I'm under the impression that I can't actually have you turn on your audio. It's been kind of controlled by the Zoom masters. All right. I'm not sure if I noticed that the open falcon creates a heart, but I believe it. With that toenail tooth and that awesome notch, it probably does. They're pretty fascinating. That is amazing. I should be good. Okay. All right, guys. All right, this should be good. I don't know why my videos. Oh, there's Chris. Hey, Chris. You're here. You did it.
All set.
Excellent. We've got people trickling in right now, coming from all over, not just New Hampshire, but the country. We've got folks coming in from Massachusetts and as far west as California.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Can I look at the list of participants somewhere?
Potentially. Yeah. If you go up to participants and then tap over on attendees, we've got 51 folks here, and I would wager that you know quite a few of those names.
I will look at them.
And we can hear you, just so you know.
Okay.
Oh, actually, it says I can a lot. Barbara Williams, are you still out there? Were you the one with your hand up? Barbara, I'm going to allow you to talk and see if that works. Oh, it does. Okay, Barbara, give it a shot. Sorry, we're definitely we're great with nature. Technology is the tricky one.
We're here.
We can hear you. Did you have a question?
No, I wanted to make sure we were not that we were muted.
Oh, you are going to.
Everybody is muted.
Everyone will be muted, yes, for the duration of the webinar until the end when we open it up for questions and comments.
That's good.
All righty, I'm going to mute you back, okay, Barbara?
Okay.
All right. All right, awesome, cool. So now I know we can do that too, which is great. And someday I hope to see a California condor. Yeah, I hope you do too. That would be amazing. They are something to be reckoned with. That was Bill Maloney was saying in the chat, someday I hope to see a California condor. Oh, this is so exciting. We're surrounded by fellow bird dorks. I'm so excited for this. All right, where are we at? All right, guys, we'll just give it another 2 minutes and then we're going to jump right on in, okay? So thank you all for being here already. We are as eager to begin as you are to have us begin. So just 2 more minutes and we'll count down and get going. Looks like Chris has a peregrine falcon lurking over his shoulder. I've got a peregrine lurking over my shoulder. It's going to be a good night.
Well, I imagine, Willa, you're in the same, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I imagine you're in the same position as me right now in a totally dark, locked up building talking to 60 or 70 people.
That's about right. Someone is coming in from Knoxville, Tennessee. Holy moly. Mark, I'm texting you right now if you can tell me what that means.
Oh, the blue button.
I thought I was already in the blue button. We're already recording.
From that message earlier, remember?
Mm-hmm. No, we're already in that one. I'm apparently not in presenter mode, which I don't really know what that means. I don't know. Oh, the PowerPoint. Oh, sure. There it is. Thanks, Mark. All right. Thanks, Mark. That's coming in from Florida for the winter, one of our migratory species, right? All right, guys. Well, it is saying 7 o'clock over here on my clock, and I want to be conscious of your time. We thank you all so much for being here for the first of our 5 parts Resilient Raptor programs. I'm so excited that we have such a big turnout for the first one. I hope that we'll see you guys sticking around for the rest of them. So greetings, everyone. I'm so thrilled that you chose to join us this evening. My name is Willa Coroka, and I am the education specialist here at New Hampshire Audubon. I'm over the moon to be here with you tonight and so pleased by the turnout. It's going to be so fun getting to highlight one of our most charismatic, fabulous, incredible birds of prey located here in our impressive Granite State. Before we begin, I would like to first acknowledge that I'm unable to share my screen again. I like that Mark is telling me I'm doing so great and I'm still struggling with technology. There we go. The presentation tonight is streaming to you from our state headquarters in Concord, New Hampshire, which is located within the site of the ancient village of Pennacook in Endakina, which is the traditional ancestral homeland and waterways of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. I would like to acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and our ancestors, the Alnambak, or human beings, who have stewarded Endakina throughout the generations for thousands of years. New Hampshire Audubon is honored to continue the stewardship of these lands, providing opportunities for all people to form connections to the natural world through our programs and wildlife sanctuaries around the state. I invite you to learn more about the Indigenous presence on the land you occupy by visiting the website native-land.ca. Here you can explore and click on territories of Indigenous peoples and get connected to resources to learn more. For a more in-depth understanding of the Granite State, check out all the educational resources at indigenousnewhampshire.com. Thank you again for joining us. From now through June, we will host monthly webinars highlighting the fierce and fabulous peregrine falcon, as we follow in real time the life cycle of the pair currently nesting in downtown Manchester. Materials and additional resources can be found over at the Manchester City Library, right in downtown Manchester, where those peregrine falcons are also chilling, hanging out, and preparing for a whole new cycle of life, as well as the Concord Public Library up in Concord, New Hampshire. We will also have materials here at the Massabesic Center in Auburn, New Hampshire. Many thanks go out to the Peregrine Networks for generously donating their cameras and streaming implements to bring the nest cam footage to our homes, offices, and classrooms. Additionally, we'd like to thank the folks at the Brady Sullivan Tower who offer their buildings to our peregrine pair and ensure the safety and protection of the special space where our annual Falcon story begins. Lastly, I'd like to thank Sue Martin of the Manchester City Library and Becky Caston of the Concord Public Library for their partnership in this series. We look forward to more opportunities in the future that help us to bridge literacy and the arts with science and conservation as we connect our communities through a shared interest in nature. Before we jump into tonight's presentation, I would like to take this opportunity to briefly describe how this webinar fits into the larger mission of New Hampshire Audubon. For those of you who don't know, New Hampshire Audubon is a state-based environmental nonprofit organization that is completely independent of National Audubon. We rely on members and donors like you to support our charitable mission, which has 4 programmatic pillars: conserving about 10,000 acres of wildlife sanctuaries throughout the state for habitat and recreation, researching trends and discovering solutions for species in peril, connecting people to nature through environmental education via school programs, field trips, summer camps, and webinars like these, and advocating for sound environmental policy in the New Hampshire State Legislature to protect the natural environment for wildlife and for people. If you're interested in hearing more, check out our website, nhaudubon.org, or visit us at one of our centers here in Auburn, New Hampshire, or up in Concord at the McLean Center, and consider becoming a member. Some Zoom information before we begin for those of you who have been trickling in. We do have about 95 people registered for tonight's first presentation. We're super excited, if you couldn't tell. So you'll see that we are in full webinar mode, which those of you that arrived earlier already are aware that we've gone through the challenges of that before. So now that I've figured it out, I think things are going to go really smoothly for the rest of that. It does mean, however, that you are all muted and we cannot see you. You can see us, but we can't see you. So don't worry about whatever it is you're doing on the other side, having a meal, sipping a cocktail, doing whatever it is that allows you to be here with us tonight. Feel free to use the chat for comments, thoughts, any reactions, you have to the presentation, but reserve the Q&A for questions only. Please and thank you. We will try our best to get to every single question possible. And if we don't have the time to do that, come and see us at one of our centers or send us an email. We would love to keep the conversation going. I'll be monitoring the Q&A and trying my best to do that. And without further ado, my friends, I would like to send the presentation over to New Hampshire Audubon's raptor biologist, Chris Martin. Chris will review several decades of work to restore state-listed peregrine falcons in New Hampshire and describe management steps and partnerships that have helped bring back these amazing aerial predators. In close collaboration with New Hampshire Fish and Game, Chris has worked more than 30 years for New Hampshire Audubon, focusing on the recovery of several of the state's bald eagles, northern harriers, and ospreys, in addition to our charismatic peregrine. He recruits, trains, and supervises enthusiastic corps of volunteer field observers who monitor these species across the state. When Chris has concluded his presentation, we'll take a few minutes to answer some of the questions that will undoubtedly be coming in before continuing on to our second subject of the evening, raptor basics and birding tips. Without further ado, Chris, when you're ready, I invite you to share your screen.
Thank you, Willa. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking time out of your evening to join us. It's great to be here. Let me go ahead and get my screen set up for sharing. And I'll look to Willa to tell me if that is coming across the way it should be.
I'm not seeing anything yet. Maybe if I stop my share first. All right, Chris, whenever you're ready, you guys can all see me and my goodies behind me.
All right. Give me just a second. I shouldn't know this stuff by now, but I don't.
We all say that, right? And
where's the share screen button?
Should be right down at the bottom in green with an arrow pointing up.
Let's enlarge that. There it is. Once I enlarge, now I can see it. Apologies to everyone.
It is all good. All right, here we go. I think it's about, here it is. We'll just make that large and we'll be great. Thanks, Chris.
All right, sorry for the false start, everybody. Again, it's great to be here. I saw in the list of participants lots of folks whose names are familiar, and it's great. Welcome to the new folks as well. Glad to have a chance to reach out to both the Concord and Manchester Public Libraries. That's a great additional way to get the word out about this. So I'm going to go over a bit of the history of the Peregrine Falcon project in New Hampshire, but we're going to keep it fairly light. These birds are really pretty interesting because they're just kind of odd in that they seem to be just as happy living in urban settings as in wilderness settings, which puts them in some interesting situations. You can be walking down the street or sidewalk in one of our larger cities and towns in New Hampshire. You might be stared at by a peregrine falcon while you're walking down the street. These guys are amazing predators. One of the tools that's most important for them is their eyesight. They are able to size up potential prey at great distances and use their forward-facing eyes to zero in on distance and speed that the creatures they're looking at are moving. Well, the second feature of them that's really important for them as a aerial predator is their wings. They are amazing flyers, can go as fast as 200 miles an hour in a stoop or dive, although typically they fly more like 50 to 60 miles an hour in a straight line flight. Another item that's really important to them is their talons, their feet with the large claws and the one rear-facing toe with a claw that helps them grasp things when they do catch it. These guys sometimes hunt from perches, other times they hunt while in the air and soaring. They will size up a flock of birds from above and pick out one that seems vulnerable and zero in on that one and dive on it from above. They are, like I said, capable of great speeds. These two immature birds in these pictures illustrate that, because the photographer couldn't even keep up with them. They're a bit blurry, but they will literally challenge you, if you're looking at them in binoculars, to keep up with them as they're involved in a dive. Again, I said the peregrines eat mostly birds, and oddly enough, one of their favorite foods is pigeons or rock doves, and in some ways they resemble their prey. Male peregrines aren't much bigger than a pigeon. They have the same sort of gray background color as many pigeons do, and they fly in some of the same ways, and their pointed wings and flight profile is awfully similar to a peregrine. I have to confess that there's been many times where I have glanced up in the sky and said, "Ooh, there's a peregrine," and on second glance I realized that it isn't. It's a pigeon, which is far more common, obviously. So this falcon here in Nashua is sizing up the local flock. Sometimes they eat smaller flocking birds like starlings, or they'll go into a flock of robins or blackbirds or grackles as well. They go into that steep dive, dropping rapidly on their prey, usually hitting it, striking it with their balled up talons, and then as that bird that they hit is disoriented and thrown off by the impact, the falcon will spin back around and snatch it out of the sky in a second grasp. This picture is actually taken in Europe, but it illustrates this so well. A flock of starlings reacting to the presence of a peregrine, and all of them are saying, "Pick him, not me." And it's amazing to me that a bird of prey can take this mass of birds and pick out one from the many and zero in on it, because a mob like this would certainly confuse me if I was trying to pick one of them out. But they are very successful at this. This is what evolution has prepared them to do. And the flock of starlings is also successful because almost all of them survived this encounter. But you can see this falcon has picked off one starling from the bunch. And these birds eat a couple songbirds or medium-sized birds a day, anything from the size of a chickadee up to the size of a wood duck in some cases. Our peregrines this time of year, and actually throughout most of the year, will establish a territory and stay in that throughout the breeding season and beyond. Oftentimes, you'll find both of them in close proximity to each other. In this case, in Haverhill, Mass, the male is on the top, the female is on the south side of the weather vane. They hang out together. They keep track of each other. They even hunt together. The male, again, the smaller bird on the left, and the female, the larger, on the right. And in fact, they cooperatively hunt and share their food. That's something they do frequently in the courtship phase, but it happens throughout the year, where sometimes when both of the birds are not involved with raising young, they will literally hunt together, and one of them will go into the flock and create a disturbance, and the other one will come in and pick off a bird. But also frequently the male will provide food to the female in courtship, and once the birds are involved in a breeding attempt with eggs or chicks. So the male delivers food, female takes it from the male, eats some of it, and also feeds the young. And if there's any left over, they store it or stash it in what's called a cache somewhere near their nest site. So we've mentioned already that peregrines nest in many urban settings, and I'm going to go back and talk about that quite a bit more shortly. But they're just as comfortable nesting in some of our most remote areas. And if you look at a cliff like this, in a lot of ways, it has some of the same features as buildings, which I find this interesting because usually I say this is the other way around, that buildings have features that resemble cliffs, but it goes both ways. The buildings are even better because they have sheltered sides no matter what direction the wind is blowing from, whereas cliffs are exposed to wind in certain directions because they only have basically one face. Many folks get involved in our efforts to document New Hampshire's nesting pairs of peregrine falcons. New Hampshire is known as the Granite State. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of large rock faces suitable as potential nest sites for peregrine falcons. And one of my jobs is to work with citizens who are interested in doing birding with a purpose, training them to recognize peregrines at a distance and be able to confirm for us whether one of these birds is actually present on a cliff like this, and hopefully be able to document that they have a mate and are trying to raise young. That's a task that we engage in annually on behalf of the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. I want to show you an example of this, if you don't mind. This is a spot that may be familiar to a lot of you. If you've ever gone up to see in the past the Old Man of the Mountain in Franconia Notch, or you go there to go downhill skiing or just to get to the North Country, you probably pass through Franconia Notch on I-93. And while people oftentimes are focused on Cannon Mountain on the western side of the road, I want to draw your attention to the cliffs on the east side. The cliff on the right is called Eagle Cliff for the presence of golden eagles there in the 19th century. And the cliff on the right, where the arrow is pointing to, is called the Eaglet Cliff, because it's a smaller version than Eagle. We're going to zoom in on this. So what I want to do is illustrate for you how difficult it is to detect a 18-inch long gray bird on a rock face like this. It's amazing how hard it is to find one of these guys if they're not cooperating by flying around in the open sky. Let's zoom in on the eaglet, and I'd like you to focus on one spire of rock that's in the sun there. It's like a finger sticking up. It's literally a freestanding steeple of rock, and the climbers have named it the Eaglet Spire. Let's go up that valley there and look at this same piece of rock from that shaded notch that you see there. So now we're up on the cliff. We're looking back down the opposite direction, and there's the Eaglet Spire, and there's a person on top of it there for scale. So you can see this is easily 100 to perhaps 150 foot tall rock spire. And the previous pictures were taken from the parking lot at the south end where people would view the Old Man of the Mountain in the past. So I want to show you, this is still possibly too far away to see a peregrine sitting still with your naked eyes. Let's zoom in on the spire. Let's zoom in on this spot right here. Okay, now we're even closer. You can see the leaves and the trees coming out. Let's look for the peregrine nest ledge on this small section of that cliff. And it's located right here. Let's go even closer. And there, finally, after all that effort, we see that we've got a peregrine falcon hunched down on that small vegetated ledge. And in fact, this bird is incubating eggs in a little depression that it and its mate have hollowed out in order to lay the eggs. They don't build their own stick nests, although peregrines will use empty raven nests as their own, take them over and use them because of the depression in that nest is perfect for eggs. Typically, they just dig in the dirt and create a low spot that holds the eggs. So during breeding season, when they're incubating eggs, especially the 5-week period where they're incubating eggs, This is the biggest challenge we have, is documenting where these nests are located. Really, the only way we can do that is by watching for exchanges that happen every few hours, where the bird comes out of the nest and the other one goes into the nest, which cinches it for us where the nest is located. But again, that's on a cliff such as this, 500 yards wide, 150 feet tall, with about 5 million ledges. So it's a huge task, and kudos to all the volunteers that have mastered this skill and help us with this work. But aside from our natural granite cliffs, we have other things that peregrines will nest on, including rock quarries. This quarry is in Westmoreland, New Hampshire, not far from Keene. It's only semi-active currently, but again, lots of ledges, and we in fact have a peregrine falcon pair that nests at this site. And so far, they've used the same ledge each year that we've been to visit them over the last 4 or 5 years. Other quarries in the state, including the famous Swenson Granite Quarry here in Concord, is home to Concord's peregrine falcon nesting pair. Interesting here, they use the granite dust from the quarrying operations as a suitable spot to lay their eggs, and hollow out a spot there. You can see this bird actually nesting in the shelter of one of the quarry's many iron ladders that allow workers to go up and down in the quarry. Some of our biggest churches are also suitable both as sites for them to perch, to hunt from, but also potentially offer little nooks that could be nesting ledges. We for a long time thought Concord's peregrines might be nesting in our church steeples until we finally located them in the quarry about a mile to the north. But those birds do go back and forth from the church as a place to hunt from and roost to the quarry to nest, to lay their eggs and nest. Other structures also are suitable. If there's a spot on these structures where eggs can be laid safely and they won't roll away or break because of the surface that they're laid on. The power plant south of Concord, between Manchester and Concord in Bow, is home to yet another pair. In that case, we installed a nest box for them to nest in successfully. And then if you haven't kept up, Manchester actually now has 2 nesting pairs of peregrine falcons. Well, 1.5, because this pair on the 101-293 bridge at the south end of town over the Merrimack River, this pair nests almost on the Bedford-Manchester town line. So we have to give Bedford a little credit for this pair as well. This pair has great shelter because they nest underneath the bridge surface, which it rarely gets wet or snows in that spot because it's so well sheltered. Again, in that location, we have installed a nest tray, which helps these birds with the issue of where to place the eggs. Again, underneath here, very good shelter, no danger of the nest washing out or becoming buried in snow. So as I said, I work with lots of volunteers all over the state, some of whom are retired age people who are looking for ways to contribute and looking for ways to get exercise as well. Hiking out to their local town cliff to check for birds, or asking us where we need help. And in that case, I'll give them some suggestions. We also work with rock climbers, folks who recreate at the same locations, and oftentimes are the ones who are first aware of the colonization of a cliff by a pair of peregrines, because they're there in the early spring already climbing. And the falcons aren't shy about letting people know they're around, especially in spring during courtship. They're quite vocal. And so not only do these climbers help us inventory the cliffs, but if we're going to go and examine and band the young, these climbers' skills are essential. So I have worked with many rock climbers over the years in a cooperative project of banding peregrine chicks. Here's an example of that. The climbers usually spend time climbing up rocks, but for peregrine work, we usually rappel down the cliff. It's much simpler and less time consuming. And the trick then is rappelling to the right location and not being too far to the left or to the right. When we get to the nest site, we oftentimes find more than one baby peregrine. They oftentimes lay as many as 5 eggs. Sometimes not all the eggs have hatched when we arrive. Some never hatch. There's usually 1 or 2 unhatched eggs in each clutch. These chicks happen to be a little bit on the young side for handling and banding, but I'll show you some that are the ripe age here pretty soon. Again, young peregrine chicks are the size that you could hold in your hand. They're quite delicate at this age, only just beginning to thermoregulate and keep themselves warm, which is the reason why they huddle together, because they're trying to share the warmth. Let's talk about distribution of peregrines across the state. This map is from 2021, so last year's results are most current information right now. The map shows in the red triangles peregrine falcon nest locations in New Hampshire, and the blue circles are nest locations where the territory includes part of our state, but the actual nest is located physically in our neighboring states. So along the Connecticut River, you can see there's a whole number of nest sites in Vermont where the birds, when they fly out of the nest, almost immediately end up in New Hampshire because the state line is on the Vermont side of the river. And a lot of their hunting territory is in New Hampshire as well. So these are shared resources between our 2 states. And you can see on this map, they're not evenly distributed. The key cluster of peregrines in our state is exactly where you might expect, in our White Mountains, where the most of our cliffs are located. But you'll also see this cluster along the Merrimack River in southern New Hampshire. Almost all those are located on human created structures of various kinds, but it's resulted in a whole new little cluster of nest sites up and down the Merrimack River. Excuse me. Another way to look at this would be looking at the history of peregrine populations in the state, starting with our first known nesting pair in 1981, which happened to be in Franconia Notch, which I showed you earlier. That was the first cliff nesting pair anywhere in the Northeast during the recovery efforts that took place in the 1970s and 80s, when groups like the Peregrine Fund, the Forest Service, and others, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, worked to bring young falcons back to these cliffs by releasing them and feeding them without the presence of parents, because there weren't any parents to raise them, and hoping that they would survive and come back and recolonize the country. That was a very successful project. It was active for many years, about 13 years in New Hampshire. But you can see there are 3 lines here. The blue line is the number of territorial pairs in our state, which now is up to about 29 as of last year. And the red line, which is active nests, that's where we know they laid eggs by behavior or by seeing the eggs or chicks. You can see those 2 lines follow each other quite closely, and they have tended to go up on a pretty steady basis over the course of 4 decades. The line that varies from year to year most substantially is the number of young fledged each year. That is highly variable, and it's largely dependent on weather conditions from one year to the next and other things that affect food supply and food delivery. So you can see we can go in the course of 1 or 2 years from an all-time high of 43 chicks produced in, 2018, I want to say, maybe it's 2017, dropping in 1 year to under 30. So again, weather and other things that affect food delivery are key to this being a very variable number. But if you look at it long term, even that number is on a gradual rise and has been since this program started back in the early 1980s. Now, there's another way to look at it still, and that's the cumulative totals. And this is kind of a funky statistic because we've never had 500 territorial pairs, but if you take all the documented nest attempts in all the years since 1981, our grand total is only 523 year territories. We've only had 330 successful nests in those 40 years, and less than 1,000, quite less than 1,000, only 774 young fledged naturally in the state in all that time, which works out to an average of about 1 2/3 young per nest per year. And again, that's not all that many. And if there are 4 chicks coming out of some nests, that also includes nests that fail. That's why the number is so relatively low. So the nest on the left here is producing a little more than the average number of young throughout the history of this project. Let's get back local here to Manchester now, because it's a great example of being able to see what happens in a peregrine nest in a way you cannot do in a remote nest on a cliff. We've had a pair nesting at the Brady Sullivan Tower now for most of the last 22 years. I say most because one year they slipped us, we lost them for a while and they moved to a different building in Manchester, but only for 1 year. The Brady Sullivan Tower near the Amoskeag Falls has been their home for 21 breeding seasons. And we've improved their home considerably in the early 2000s by actually placing this box originally in the 1990s. I take that back. We put this box there in the 1990s, and it was occupied sporadically by pigeons in the 90s. And then finally, in the early 2000s, peregrines moved in. You can see the view across the river into West Manchester here, which is the same view the falcons have. We installed a perch pole that sticks out and gives them a much better view of what goes on around them. I'm going to mention that while we can see these birds on camera now, we can see the nest, their world is far bigger than what you can see on the nest cams because they use the entire outside of the building and the rest of the city as well in places that we don't see on camera. We're probably only 3 to 4 weeks away from the beginning of egg laying at this site this year. I know today the camera watchers did see mating happening on camera on the perch pole. It may happen several times a day in other locations as well, but we were able to get both sight and sound of the mating this morning, which was wonderful. So we'll see an egg every 2 days once they start laying until they lay 4 or 5 eggs, and then they'll be well into incubation at that point. A couple of years ago, we lost a nest attempt, and yet the female mated with a new male, and they laid, after laying 4 eggs, originally they laid 5 more eggs. So in that course of about 6 weeks, that female laid a total of 9 eggs, same female. They'll incubate them for 5 weeks. This holds whether you're in a city site or a cliff site. 5 weeks of keeping the eggs warm. The adults change places. They take turns on the nest. Each of them gets time off, which really isn't time off. There's other things you have to do when you're away from the eggs. But day and night, keeping those eggs warm. And once the chicks hatch, they'll be in the nest for about 6 weeks until they begin to fly. And they'll still be dependent on the adults for another month after that. even if they're no longer coming to the nest box every day. So in 21 consecutive breeding seasons in Manchester, without a failure, we've had a total of 65 young peregrines produced. This is outstanding, over 3 young per nesting attempt over that 20+ year period. And I cannot identify another location in New Hampshire that has gone 20 years without a nesting failure. And you say, wait, you said they failed one time and the mate died and the new mate came in. Well, even that year, when the first clutch of eggs failed and the female had to find a new mate, 1 chick was produced from that second nesting attempt. So even in that year, we had success, the way I just defined it, as producing at least 1 young. So remarkable level of success, due, I believe, in large part to high amounts of quality food in Manchester and extremely well sheltered nest site. And credit again to Brady Sullivan for allowing us to utilize the top floor of their building as a site for this nest. Just want to mention again about the high quality food. The picture on the left there, Will is laughing. The picture on the left there is the only parakeet I've ever seen brought to the peregrine nest box in over 20 years. Oddly enough, we received an email from a woman who had lost her indoor parakeet less than 2 hours before this picture was taken on the west side of Manchester. And peregrine falcons are so adept at picking out vulnerable prey items that even though it was half a mile away when it escaped, this pet fell prey to the peregrines within a couple hours. It's just remarkable, their ability to size up things that are vulnerable to capture. So they also eat bats as well, some large dragonflies, but mostly birds about the size of a blue jay is their main type of food. I mentioned the camera. Thanks to Peregrine Falcon networks or Peregrine networks for all their knowledge and troubleshooting and hardware. This picture shows you what the box looks like from the inside of the building. We have 3 different cameras on that box that give you different views, and a microphone, which works with one of the camera views. Again, this may not be how you pictured a peregrine falcon nest site to look, but this is the side the falcons don't look at. They have gravel and a beautiful view of downtown Manchester. We have plywood and step ladders and wires. That's our side of the structure. So fortunately, when this was built, we installed a nice opening to allow us to access this nest site without putting on harnesses and ropes and rappelling down the outside of the building and driving our insurance company crazy. So we have ways to access these birds when it's time to examine and band them. The adult female in particular is not pleased by our intrusion into her nest box. She puts on a good show of force, but we know that the only thing we have to worry about is making sure that she doesn't get into the building. She is the one that does most of the defending at a nest site. The female is bigger than the male, has body bulk and weapons that are more powerful than the males, both her beak and her feet. And given the chance, she would use those in defense of her nest. Here's the male, a picture taken by Willa just a month or 2 ago at the same nest site. The 2 birds are slightly different in plumage, certainly different in size. You can tell our male in Manchester is because he has narrow facial stripes, whereas the female has almost a black, entirely black side of her face without the white cheek patch behind the stripe. So you can tell the two of them apart quickly by that. He's white-breasted. She has more speckles on her chest and on her belly. And again, he's smaller than the female. Excuse me. I know I'm going to run over time here, so I'm going to try to move through this part as quick as I can. Every year, we'll pull these young chicks out of the nest in Manchester and at some other sites as well. I think I'll mention that shortly. Bring them to a place where we can show folks what this work is all about. Let them hear how loud baby peregrines can be when they're requesting food or requesting help from their parents. Set them out, and if this year we aren't able to do this as a public event, we'll certainly do it online and let people see it that way. But hopefully we'll be able to have people join us in person this year. We'll see how the COVID season goes. They're very noisy. It's hard to talk over them, but people just love to be up close with these baby birds in a way that doesn't hurt either the people or the birds, while we put ID tags on them where we can hopefully identify them again in the future. At this stage, their feathers are just coming in to replace the down that they get when they first develop feathers. The downy feathers are replaced by their juvenile plumage, which they'll wear for most of their first year. It grows in slowly but surely, and the downy feathers all come off and end up scattered around the nest box and blowing in the wind all over the north end of Manchester. We put these ID bands on these birds with individual code numbers so that if the bird is found injured in the future or found dead somewhere in the future, or what we were hoping for is found alive at a nest site somewhere in the future, we'll be able to identify how old it is and where it came from. We have many color-banded peregrine falcons in New England who have originated from Manchester's nest site over the past 20 years. And if anybody's curious about some of those, I'd be glad to share some of those details with you. If you just let me know, I'd be happy to do that. So banding takes only a few minutes for each bird. We want to make sure they're healthy. We want to make sure we put the proper size leg band on females who have bigger legs than the males. We don't want to put too tight a band on a female bird. And their legs are full size at 3 weeks of age, like this bird. And so we can be pretty sure that they'll wear these bands without incident for the rest of their lives. So we do have to put rivets on these bands because the peregrine's beak is powerful. And if they weren't riveted closed, they would bend that aluminum open and get the band off. Some of our young birds don't do well on their first flight. They end up grounded. In that case, they are picked up and we don't assume that they're fully healthy. We assume they may have an injury. We would take them to a wildlife rehabilitator like the Wings of the Dawn in Henniker, Maria Colby's wonderful operation. They might go to a veterinarian for x-ray. Sometimes the Manchester animal control officer is the one who picks up one of these birds. And again, the leg band signals them that there's something special about this animal and they need to inquire further about where it came from. And we've had them come back to the building after receiving a call from the animal control saying, I think we have a bird you'll be interested in. Unfortunately, other times, these injuries are severe, like this compound fracture of the wing bones in this bird. Both the radius and ulna are broken in this bird, and this bird had really no chance of healing in this case. The fracture punctured the skin, and that bird did need to be euthanized. But in other cases, we're able to bring them back to full flight ability and release them back to the wild. At the nest site, possibly, if it happens soon enough, but otherwise in a suitable place like Horseshoe Pond in Concord, New Hampshire, releasing this bird back to the wild with ID bands so that, again, if it has more trouble, we'll recognize where it came from and what its history is. Young peregrine falcons spend a long time near their nest site, learning skills from their parents, from their siblings, starting by catching dragonflies, working up to bats and small birds, before they migrate south or southwest in the fall. This young peregrine from New Hampshire showed up in New York City as in the spring of its second year. Still has its juvenile plumage, but spent time on the Hudson River and was well photographed as it began to transition from its juvenile brown plumage to its adult gray plumage in its first year. That was several years ago now. We haven't heard from this banded bird since, so we don't know if it's alive or where it may have ended up. But at that point, it was doing quite well, that's for sure. I'm going to stop now because I know Willa has information she wants to present too. Sure. And I don't know when you want to do the questions, Willa.
I think we're going to take a few questions really quick, Chris, because I've been following the Q&A as well as the chat, and some of the answers might have been kind of glazed over, so I'm just going to reiterate them for you guys. One of them I think we can both answer pretty effectively, and it was the question of, have there been issues with the falcons eating homing pigeons? And based on the image we saw momentarily, if there is an eligible bird that makes an eligible meal out in the wild, it is going to be in the food web, and thus an opportunistic falcon might be bringing it back to the nest box.
That's true. And when we visit nest sites, it's our habit to collect as much feathers, bones, and other prey remains as we can and look at them later to see what's in them. And many times we have picked up plastic pigeon ID bands, which come from homing pigeons. And so it's clear that homing pigeons are also one of the things that peregrines will eat.
For sure. When we just cleaned out the nest a couple of weeks ago, we found a band in there that we'll be showing to you guys later on in the series. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. Another question is, how often do the peregrines return to the same nest site on the cliff ledges?
Well, we know from again, banding helps us know this because our banded birds, we can read the leg bands multiple years in a row if the bird is in the same location. And typically, if they have survived, typically both the male and the female will return to the same breeding territory year after year after year, sometimes as many as 10 years or more. Having said that, one of our peregrine falcons outfitted with a satellite transmitter shifted nest sites 30 miles after breeding successfully for 3 years in a row at one location in Newfound Lake, moved 30 miles west to Holt's Ledge, and for the last 4 years has nested there instead. And you can read more about that bird in our e-news because it recently has turned up as an injured bird in Pennsylvania, a place where it winters annually. And that bird is still in recovery in Pennsylvania right now, although typically it would be returning to New Hampshire this week based on our satellite data. You want me to stop sharing my screen now?
Sure. Yeah, you can stop sharing yours and I'll start sharing mine. This will stop the screen. Sounds good. And this guy right here. So we had a couple more questions that we will definitely aim to cover. Chris, are you seeing mine in full screen?
I am, not full screen, but I'm seeing it.
Because someone was just asking, what is the easiest way to determine if a bird in flight is a hawk or falcon, especially if you can only see it for a few seconds? Well, hopefully this next part of the program will help us to determine how it is that we can tell a hawk or falcon apart from some of our other larger bird species. And so the first thing we're going to do real quick is go over what makes a raptor in the first place. And so looking at this picture here, I want you guys to look and focus in on some of the immediate anatomical features that strike you. It's that fierce eye, the forward pointed vision, and that hooked beak. The hooked beak is one of the most important elements of a raptor, and it serves for a very good purpose. Raptors use that beak for food consumption, and it's hooked and strong to tear and rip meat in order to either take it into smaller chunks to go right down the gullet or to swallow it whole. It also acts as a killing mechanism for a variety of different raptor species. Another element that makes a raptor is those sharp talons. Super sharp, super large. Every time I show this to kids, I hear, is that a velociraptor? And I say, well, it's pretty darn close. It's a bird of prey. Those talons there belong to a red-tailed hawk. You can actually see the tail on the right-hand side. They are designed to hold on tight by using this amazing ratchet grip. So not only are they sharp, but they're incredibly strong and they can exert an extreme amount of pressure. Another thing we think of when we consider raptors and other birds of prey is their incredible eyesight, which Chris had mentioned earlier. In our next webinar, we'll be going a little bit deeper into the facts that make peregrines a little bit different from other raptors. And teaser, it's their eyesight. Among many other things, their eyesight is unbelievable. But all raptors have pretty exceptional eyesight, particularly when compared to many other animal species. And last but not least is raptors are carnivorous. They use all of those above features, that amazing eyesight, that hooked beak, those crazy sharp, super strong talons to catch and consume their preferred meal. Putting that all together, you've got a pretty exceptional bird of prey. Now, when it comes to trying to decide which bird of prey is which, we start thinking about size. Raptors come in a variety of different sizes, as you can see in this slide here, where we have our itty bitty American kestrel, who's small enough to fit on a finger. They're a little bit smaller than blue jays. Two large bald eagles, which Chris is holding in this picture on the opposite side. That right there is a juvenile bald eagle, which is why he is not wearing his full ivory cloak of a hood that he will develop in his older stages. The middle section has a photograph of me with a peregrine falcon, so you can see the size difference, as well as one of our other environmental educators, Shelby, who's holding our resident red-tailed hawk. When you're thinking about sizes for most raptors, you're going to be thinking of something fairly solid sized. Their silhouettes help with that, and we'll talk about that in just a second. One of the biggest raptors here in this general region was this guy just a couple of weeks ago. Those of you that have been paying attention, that is a Steller's sea eagle. I don't know who the guy is that's holding it. I borrowed this photo from the web, but you can see the mass of this animal. He's about the size of his entire upper torso, and he's got a beak and talons to match. Shape is another great indicator to decide whether or not a bird is a raptor, and whether that raptor is something like a red-tailed hawk up in that center photo with the wide tail and the large wings, or a falcon with those V-shaped wings, really pointy, really designed to slice through the sky. Those wings are enormous, and you can see on the right-hand side, I believe it's the right-hand side on your screen, the bird with the really big feet, the really big talon, and the wing feathers that are as long as the tail. That is one of our peregrine falcons. They have enormous feet, very sharp pointed wings for slicing through the air, and a sleek profile when they are in flight. That last silhouette down in the bottom with a super long tail is one of our smaller relatives of raptor, or our smaller relative of the peregrine falcon. That belongs to a Cooper's hawk, which for those of you who feed the birds, the songbirds I mean, you've probably seen a Cooper's hawk hanging out in your resident area, because they are learning that if you feed the birds, you can help feed the hawks too, because the hawks are the ones gobbling up those songbirds hanging near the feeder. Now, when it comes to plumage, a lot of people go directly to plumage feathering patterns, feathering colors to determine what type of bird they're seeing. That can work for raptors for sure. But for the most part, they're all blending in with their surroundings because they are frequently on the hunt and sometimes being hunted themselves, as the case with some of our smaller raptors, like that American kestrel, again, in that left-hand corner. These guys are designed to blend in so they can stay safe or sneak attack. That said, most of the time, these birds are not consistently the same color from generation to generation in terms of age. What I'm trying to say here is while they might look like that as an adult, they don't always look the same as a juvenile. And again, we'll be talking about that in much more depth, specifically referring to the peregrine falcon in future webinars. This is just a quick, don't get overwhelmed, get excited, but be aware. Identifying raptors can be challenging if you aren't totally convinced of what they look like. Now, habitat is a big one. Raptors have become very adaptive to live in city environments as well as their natural environments, cliffs, forests, etc. Birds like our peregrine falcon and our red-tailed hawk are comfortable living now in urban environments like Manchester and in people's backyards, as well as out in the deep forests of the wild. Many of our other raptors are not adapting as well, and they require the deep forests, the hardwoods, the old growth forests like this northern goshawk, as well as marshy areas where they lay their eggs down in deep nesting material, but in locations that are getting scarcer because of habitat loss. If they can find food and water and shelter, a raptor is pretty capable of living wherever it can do those things. Now, behavior with these guys, and I know I'm running out of time, which is why I am talking way too fast, and I apologize. Behavior is going to be one of pretty much three things for you guys to see them as a bird watcher. They're going to be soaring or gliding through the sky. They're going to be perching, checking out what's going on, keeping themselves warm by reducing how much energy they're presenting out into the world in the colder seasons, or hanging out and perching and waiting for that hunt. You're going to see them preening often. And those of you guys that are already watching the peregrine falcon nest cams are noticing that they spend most of their day cleaning those feathers and making sure that they are prepared for flight if they need to go and soar off into the city sky. So these images here are showing perching and waiting to hunt, soaring, checking out their environment, and preening. And that cycle pretty much repeats. We'd mentioned the beak earlier today. A raptor's beak is entirely designed for consumption. Those strong, curved beaks are designed to pull and tear. And next week, when we talk deeper, or not next week, in 2 weeks, when we start talking deeper about the peregrine falcon, we'll recognize some of the really unique elements that falcon beaks have that make them significantly different from eagles and hawks, like the other photos on the screen. Last thing that kind of, sort of, usually kind of maybe will be able to help us determine whether or not we're seeing a sharp-shinned hawk or a Cooper's hawk, which is super difficult. They look almost identical unless they're next to each other, or a broadwing hawk per se, or an osprey, is the time of year. Some of our raptor species are not here during the winter. Some of them are only here during their breeding seasons. For now, we're going to be focusing on our peregrine, who is here, luckily for us in New Hampshire, almost all year long. We do have some migrants that are over by the coast, but the ones in the Manchester region tend to be there most of the year. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Chris. Okay. All right, guys. So a quick review of this raptor or not, now that you know those general basics, having the curved beak, the large eyes forward facing, the huge talons, and the bulky figures, we're able to look at these photos and decide whether or not these birds are raptors or something else. So looking at that one, we all know now with the hooked beak, the huge eyes, those incredibly intimidating talons. You guys have probably seen this bird in your own backyards if you're here in New Hampshire. That's one of our more common backyard hawks. That, my friends, is a Cooper's hawk with that long tail for zipping in between trees and bird feeders and buildings. You guys know the difference with this one, right? If you're looking at beak and eye position, you don't even need to see the webbed feet of the duck. You know it can't be a raptor. But what about this guy? Eyes kind of facing forward, beak looking fairly intimidating, but definitely not curved. That is our resident raven, and a raven is not in the raptor classification. Take a look at those bad boys. Just a simple image tells us that these talons belong to a raptor. In this case, it's a barred owl with feathers going all the way down to the base of their toes for excellent insulation and quiet departures to and from branches. That's definitely not a raptor, right? Those are showing us a totally different type of bird whose feet are perfectly adapted to the location and habitat where it would be found. Another sharp image of a super hooked beak, we're talking about a raptor. But this bird has a hooked beak too. So what's what? Some of you guys out there might have this as a pet. This is an African gray parrot. African gray parrots are certainly not in the raptors classifications. Look at the points of its eye. That eye is totally on the side. And as we like to say in our classrooms, eyes in front like to hunt, eyes on side run and hide. That parrot is most certainly not a raptor, even if it does have a hooked beak. Eyes in front like to hunt. Check out this guy. We're talking serious. Raptors are no joke. And last but not least, checking out that silhouette while they're in their sky formation, whether they're soaring or diving like the Peregrine Falcon in this photo. Raptors are pretty amazing species. And if there's ever a question, if you're hanging out at a bird feeder or checking out a wildlife cam, if you see a bird hanging out by a bird feeder and gobbling up the suet or nibbling on the cracked corn or eating the peanuts, chances are it's not a raptor. If you see a bird eating that bird, chances are it is a raptor. We do have some quick footage from the field for those of you guys that have been watching. I want to direct everyone's attention. I think we are out of time at this point, so I want to just allow everyone some more time for questions and answers. And I will drop into that chat box some resources so that those of you who haven't yet found the Manchester Peregrine Falcons on YouTube are able to. Because as Chris had said earlier today, we do have footage of them breeding right there on that perch. We have a gajillion hours of them preening and cleaning their feathers to make sure that they are oiled and well prepared for flight and for proper insulation. So we'll take some questions, but it looks like Chris might want to start us off with that.
I just wanted to tell everybody, and if you didn't know it, these cameras operate 24 hours a day. They work at night as well as the day. They're not infrared cameras, but you can see activity if there is activity in the nest box, regardless of time of day or night. So it's always worth a look whenever you have a chance.
I agree. I actually have one kind of up right now that I think you guys can see. I took a quick clip, and so you can actually take some clips off it too. I think you guys are able to see this right over here. It's just a quick image of what you'll be seeing if you're logged on to the, and it's not even logged on. If you're checking out the YouTube station, you can get glimpses like this all the time. We don't have a night cam, correct, Chris? So we're not seeing much when they're just chilling?
Not night vision, but the birds are in silhouette because the city has light all the time.
There we go. So you guys can watch them 24/7. It's better than Wordle. Check out the peregrines when you get a chance. And there are some chat options so you can chit chat with fellow bird enthusiasts. We have some amazing folks that are out there watching these pretty religiously. And to be perfectly honest, I think they end up getting better footage than I do. And I try to watch as often as I can. So I'm going to stop share so we can all see each other and see if we have any more questions from our Q&A as people are getting ready to take off for the evening, because I do want to say thank you so very much for those of you that have spent this entire evening with us. We really, really appreciate it and hope that you will consider A, checking out the Peregrine Falcons, B, coming to our next Resilient Raptors webinar series, which is going to be 2 weeks from now on March 15th, where we'll be going way deeper into the actual features that make peregrines unique. We'll be talking to Chris again and interviewing him as a wildlife biologist. So if anyone is interested in hearing some stories from the field or asking what it's like to be working in the fields, in the swamps, in the streams, by the marsh, on the cliff sides, that'll be how we start off our first program. And I feel like there's something, oh, of course, we'll be following in real time these falcons. So next 2 weeks, we'll be discussing courtship, avian courtship, as well as mating, breeding, and what's going on in the nest cam. So those of you that have to run, thank you so much for being here. Those of you that are able to stick around, we'll jump into the Q&A for a couple more minutes and then we'll let you head off on your way. Chris, you got another like 2 minutes and we'll see if we can get some questions.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your interest in this.
We really, really do. Okay, so I think we had answered how often did we answer how often the peregrines return to the same nesting site? I think you were answering it while I was fiddling with my page.
Yeah, I mean, they typically return year after year after year if they've survived typically they'll come back to the same place. And of course, typically they'll be the same mate. But every now and then, one of them has met their fate and they've died, and quickly they're replaced by a new eligible member of the pair.
Awesome. Awesome, awesome. And then I think it was my grandma, actually, who was in the chat, and she had asked, Grandma, I hope you're still out there. She was asking if you banned all of the chicks that you monitor, Chris. Do all of those chicks get a band?
The answer to that is no. When we had 5 or 6 nest sites in the entire state, we were banding the vast majority of the young birds, but that amounted to 10 or 15 baby birds. Now, when we have over 40 and 20 sites with young, time just doesn't allow for that to happen. So the answer is no, we're not doing that at that rate anymore.
Right on. That makes sense. I did not know the answer to that. So Grandma, I just learned something new. Thanks for asking that question.
Thanks, Grandma.
Donna wants to know, who are their predators? Who are the peregrine falcon's predators? Good question.
That's a great question. And at what stage in their lives are they vulnerable to predation is a good question. Peregrine falcons are most vulnerable in their first, while they're still confined to the nest, to things like great horned owls, which are amazing nighttime predators. And remarkably, peregrines aren't very well adapted to defend against great horned owls. In fact, even if they tried, the owls are big and muscle their ways in. In fact, places that have great horned owls in great numbers are oftentimes bad places to try to get peregrines to nest because of that issue. But also raccoons and fisher, things that climb. If the nest isn't predator proof in the sense that it has vertical surfaces to keep climbing animals from getting in, those things can especially be egg predators, eat the eggs or damage the eggs or the small chicks. So there's 2 examples right there.
That's fantastic. I actually had found a YouTube video once of a great horned owl in the night, of course, is a nocturnal predator coming right up to the ledge, grabbing a chick and proceeding off into the night. It's the cycle.
I just saw another
right,
question
guys?
I'd love to answer.
Yeah, for sure.
Hildy asked, where do the fledglings go? And it's clear from monitoring nest sites after the end of the breeding season that they don't stick around. They rarely ever stick around. Fledgling peregrines, based on band returns and on birds that have had transmitters, tend to move several hundred miles to the south or southwest along the coast or inland along the Appalachian chain, but don't necessarily go far. The peregrines you hear about that fly long distances are actually coming from the Arctic and passing through our area and going all the way to Cuba or South Florida or places like that. But our peregrines only are slightly migratory and will probably only go several hundred miles to the south and southwest rather than fly thousands of miles to South America.
Excellent. It looks like we might be wrapping things up. I'm adding the event calendar link into our chat right now, my friends. You're going to be registering. I don't have to type this now because I'm talking to you. You guys will be registering the same way as before, and you'll get a confirmation email, and then you'll get that registration link the day before the next event, as well as 1 hour before to remind you guys. I'm just going to check one last time to see if we have any more questions. We got the predators. We're trying to figure out the easiest way to determine a bird in flight. That's going to be a lot more practice, but we'll give you some more tips later on. And other than that, I think we're getting lots of thank yous, lots of hope to see you again next time. I want to sincerely thank all of you guys for showing up and taking time out of your busy schedules to think about peregrines, to join us for this evening here at New Hampshire Audubon. And I'm just so thrilled that you're as excited as we are to get deep down into the amazing lives, the hidden stories of the peregrine falcons located.
Thanks so much. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you, Chris, for being here tonight. We'll see you soon, everybody.
Have a good evening, everyone. Good night.